Are we going to back people who have been in the trenches, who are committed, who have made their life's work, pushing forward, struggling for, and building justice and equality? That's not necessarily the default posture among the leaders of the Democratic Party. It's not the default posture of people in philanthropy. You gravitate towards people who are more reasoned and rational, but not necessarily to the fighters. This is a period where we need fighters.
Welcome to System Catalyst, the show that cracks the code on making the world a better place. I'm your host, English Saul. Today, we're talking to my friend Steve Phillips, a political leader, best-selling author, and columnist. He wrote Brown is the New White and How We Win the Civil War, books that explore how America's changing demographics are reshaping our politics and what it takes to build a multiracial democracy. Steve also writes for The Guardian and The Nation, contributes to the New York Times, and hosts his podcast, Democracy in Color, where he dives into race, politics, and the multicultural, progressive new American majority. Steve, it's so great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to dive into these questions. I want to sort of start off by talking a little bit about kind of your work, in systems change, and obviously also kind of the books and the writing that you have put into the space. And I was, I'm curious. I know that you're actually in the midst of working on another book, which is super exciting. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Brown is the New White and How We Win the Civil War. And I would love for you to talk a little bit to our audience about maybe what is the through line across these books and maybe even also in the new one that you're working on. So tell us a little bit about what is the sort of systemic, movement building nature that you have in the DNA of these books.
Well, I think the through lines that people keep not listening, so I have to keep writing new books, right? So there is that. Just a couple background bio pieces that inform all of this, right? And so, I am quite literally a child of the civil rights movement, right? I grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, Dartmoor Road. We desegregated the street when we moved on. My brother was the first black student at the local elementary school. One of my earliest memories was going to see Martin Luther King when he came to Cleveland. I was like 3 or 4 years old. And so I read all the biographies of Dr. King in my local elementary school. So that milieu has always impacted me. And I've always, for whatever reason, been drawn to electoral politics and social change. My next door neighbor, Art Brooks, ran for state legislature, and I think I was like 8 or 10. I remember going to their victory party next door and whatnot. So that's always been kind of in the mix. So a really catalytic, transformative period of my life really was when Jesse Jackson ran for president, particularly in 1984 and then 1988. And so it was a direct connection to the civil rights movement. And that Jesse was literally there when Dr. King was killed and has explicitly embraced and tried to carry on that struggle at the 88 Democratic Convention, national address. Speaking at the convention, he says, all of you think you are seated, but you're really standing on someone's shoulders. Ladies and gentlemen, Rosa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement, and brings Rosa Parks onto the stage, to the podium. So all of that was very formative for me. And so to me, with that background, and actually even looking at like how well Jesse had done in several southern states, in Georgia and Virginia and Alabama, in the primaries, that it was clear to me that Obama's victory was an extension of that work, of the civil rights movement, the mobilizing the new American majority, the demographic revolution in the country. And I got alarmed that people did not see and appreciate that. And that's why I wrote the first book, is I wanted to try to quantify and illustrate how Obama had won and what were the implications for the future of politics within this country in the context of this ongoing demographic revolution. So that's the whole basis of Brown is the New Way, is to illuminate. To illuminate who is this new American majority, where is it, and how fast it's growing, and what we need to do to double down and further invest in it. So that's what that book and how that all came about.
Yeah. So, and this, I mean, since I've even known you, which is, way back when, probably over a decade now, I think is when we first met.
So, yeah.
This has been so pivotal in your life's work and in Susan's life's work. And I would would you talk a little bit about sort of how you both came together and the legacy that she has also left, and maybe even touch on this film that you guys have just sort of, that your team has put out and what you're working on. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, after Susan had passed, I put something on Facebook saying that we had transcended barriers of race, class, and religion to find each other and forge a life together and try to set about trying to change the world. And that, I think, is a very apt illustration. I mean, we met at an education reform conference, and, I said, we were talking about California education reform, and I was all like, this is all fine, but how are we going to change the whole state, right? So in terms of like having that kind of ambition, we were like super nerdy social change people. She was very into nonviolence and nonviolent social change and studied Gandhi, but hadn't studied a lot about King. So on Martin Luther King's birthday, after our first dinner, I gave her the collected works of Martin Luther King.
Oh my gosh.
She gave me a paper she'd written on Paulo Freire and his Pedagogy of the Oppressed and how that applies in terms of popular education. So that was our kind of nerdy courtship.
So sweet.
But it all kind of came together in trying to make social change. And so I wound up running for school board. She helped to write the policy platform piece. And so we did all of that work. And then Susan's family, very, successful business people, significant philanthropists. And so Susan gravitated to finding and backing key leaders. And so we were the first national donors to support Stacey Abrams back in 2012. And that ties back to being able to having seen what Jesse Jackson was able to do in Georgia and what the potential was. And so when Stacey says there's 1 million eligible, unregistered people of color in Georgia, I'm going to register them to vote. We were like, let's go. Let's get behind this journey. We're on with it on that whole decade. And that's ultimately in terms of where then when we had Susan got the cancer diagnosis in 2016, and we did this whole strategic planning where we concluded, looking back at what we had been doing, that people are more important than strategies or plans.
Yeah.
And that our role is enabling talented people, and Stacey Abrams being Exhibit A, right? And so Stacey called me in 2021 after the Congress had flipped because of Georgia sending 2 new senators and Biden winning the state. And I said to her, so you took that first, money that we gave you and you've turned it into $2 trillion for the American people because they had passed those COVID reliefs. She says, I like to provide return on investment.
Yeah. Talk about ROI. Yes.
100%. So Stacey came on. She has expertise in so many different things. So she came on to be executive producer for this documentary. And so we've done this film, Power Not Persuasion, the Susan Sandler legacy, looking at the groups she invested in, the people she invested in, and kind of the impact that it had. And really looking at in terms of systems change. And that she had written this in a Medium piece, kind of outlining her, philanthropic legacy, that it's far more important to try to change the people in power than to try to change the minds of the people in power.
Ooh, wow. I mean, I think it's such a potent message, not only for that point in time, right? 2020, 2021, but right now. Like the message has not lost its potency over the political kind of ups and downs and sort of the life and world that we exist in. And I just have to say, from a young person's, a young mother's perspective, how important your work and Susan's work has been for me. And as you know this, Steve, it's I have 4 children. I have 2 white sons and I have 2 black daughters. And the role that, what I've been able to witness with you and with Susan and the work that you have done and really blurring the divide in for this effort of multiracial, just multiracial world is so important. And it's so important for me and my family in particular. And I'm curious to know how you are thinking about things and how you are sort of, what your perspective is right now and the current, political climate, the current climate that we're in. What do you feel like are some of the very structural obstacles in building that multiracial democracy in today's society, in today's world?
Yeah. So, obviously this is a profound period. Well, it's interesting. So I was talking about how formative the Rainbow Coalition experiences were, and then my exposure to Jesse Jackson, who was the direct tie to the civil rights movement. So I remember there's this painting that I like called Cotton Picker by John Biggers, and it's this person bending over picking cotton in the field. And I've been drawn to that because I still remember in 1989 that I was in Sacramento in Maxine Waters' state legislative office at the time. Jesse Jackson had come out for this march and rally we were doing, and someone says to Jesse, "Oh, you must be so tired. You're traveling all over the country." And without missing a beat, Jesse says, "It beats picking cotton." And that has always stayed with me in terms of framing our work, our context, the moment. And that so that's why I refrain from saying this is an unprecedented period of time. But that's obviously a very extreme and, dangerous and scary time. And so my second book was called How We Won the Civil War. And so the publisher had come to me in 2020, and asked to think about writing another book. So this was, almost 4 years in the Trump's administration. And I said, so maybe we should look at this moment through the lens of the Civil War and use that like as a metaphor for where the country is at, that just battling over whether or not this is a country conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are created equal. Do we still believe that? Do we care about inequality? And so for a brief moment in 2020, after George Floyd was killed, most people said they did. But now you have this unrelenting, unapologetic assault and backtracking, which began before this administration, by the way, on trying to address inequality. And so there's so much more attention on attacking the remedies to inequality than there is to the inequality itself. And so that, I think, is a lot of where we have to start to focus now. Do we care about it? Then what are we going to do about it? And what I really want to try to lift up in this next book is to try to help us shift our orientation and our lens away from this concept of the underrepresentation of people of color to the overrepresentation of whites and the overrepresentation of white men in particular. And so that's a very different inquiry from what do people of color lack around why they're not being promoted and hired and elected, to what are the preferences, what is the psychological, social, emotional deference being provided to white men, that they are the ones who are in almost all the different positions in our society. So it's a very different inquiry, but I also think it helps us to then be more on the offensive around trying to resume the push for equality and justice.
So it's really interesting. So when I was studying in school, my PhD is in industrial and organizational psychology. And there's a whole pillar of that route of study around leadership. And we talk about these things called internal leadership theories. And I went through this exercise when I was in grad school, and when I became a professor, I also put my students through this exercise, which was just at the beginning of class one day, as we're talking about leaders, I want you to write down your top 5 leaders, like write down names of your top 5 leaders. And to your point, almost everyone would write down 5 white men.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it's interesting. And I started to see a shift actually during the Obama administration, right? When he was president, he would be one of the names on the list. And then even later on, occasionally I would see Michelle Obama being someone on the list. And I'm curious to know, and this is even more of like a selfish inquiry, but there's something around the stories that we tell, the narratives that we speak and that we lean into. And I forget who it was who said this, but they said stories are the water that we swim in. And so as a mother of Black and white children, what are the stories? What are the stories that come to your mind when we're talking about leaders, when we're talking about systems catalysts, when we're talking about the people that are holding up the backbone of society as we are continuing to try and move equality forward in a multiracial democracy? What are the stories that resonate with you?
I think actually that at this point, in terms of stories, one of the things that's most important to find and share and celebrate with people are stories of white people who have fought for racial justice. And so we mentioned the film. That's why I'm trying to do the film. But I just think that so almost on the progressive side, we do ourselves a disservice, and that feeds into this notion. So then the right wing is more able to exploit and appeal to like, oh, they don't care about you, et cetera. And so, Susan's parents ran a big, corporation, second largest savings and loan in the country, actually, at the time. Susan's mother, which I didn't even realize until I was doing research for this book, Susan's mother was the second female CEO of a major American corporation in the history of the country.
Wow.
That the first was Katharine Graham, when her at the Washington Post, and then Marion Sandler built up World Savings.
Wow.
And so they just decided in the early 90s, they were like, our board of directors isn't diverse enough. And so most places would be like, well, how do we find somebody? You try to scour, and then you might get one recommendation, and then you've got something. In the space of like, I want to say 2 years, but I think it was shorter than that, they transformed their board to majority women and people of color. They just did it. And they brought all these other people on. The company did not suffer economically. It continued to become this economic powerhouse and whatnot. So I think people need stories and examples like that. And so are we going to back people who have been in the trenches, who are committed, who have made their life's work pushing for, struggling for, and building justice and equality? That's not necessarily the default posture among the leaders of the Democratic Party. It's not the default posture of people in philanthropy. You gravitate towards people who are more reasoned and rational, but not necessarily to the fighters. This is a period where we need fighters.
I mean, that's so on point and so well said. And it brings me to this other question that you teed up for me perfectly. So thank you for that. Philanthropy, funding, providing the risk capital for backing people who aren't afraid to fight, who aren't afraid of the complexity horizon. There's a kind of an adage, I think, that was going around in the philanthropic space for a while. I'm not sure if you heard it, but there was this question around if Martin Luther King was alive today and came to the philanthropic world asking for funding for the civil rights movement, there was a hypothesis or I don't know, I think it was maybe data backed, like they were actually interviewing people about this, that said most philanthropists wouldn't fund him. And I think that that's probably true. I think today, in this day and age, I think that you're going to be hard pressed to find philanthropic capital that would go towards a risky movement building attempt to combat the status quo. And I'm really curious around your perspective on this. Where do we get that? Where do we get the risk appetite and the funding to do just that, to fund the fighters who are going to take, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, it's going to take resources, it's going to take grit. So where do we go to get that funding? And how do we convince the funders that that's the right thing to do?
So I think there's, I would say, three things in terms of where we go to get and find and strengthen the, I was going to say the backbone, but get people who have strengthened backbones in positions of moving money, right? So one is some things are changing in terms of more people from movement, social change backgrounds are moving into philanthropy. And so that's a significant development, right? There's this organization, Committee on States, that started out as a, basically all white proposition. And then I was talking to somebody recently, we tried to get some people of color into that, like a decade ago. And they were like, oh, there are 35 people of color in leadership positions at the state level in various Committee on states. And I was like, no, they're not. But then they were like, gave me the list and we had a retreat and there they were. And so there are more people from these communities who are more fighters moving into the positions. So that's one piece, is our people who are in philanthropic authority positions, hiring people who are connected to the movement, engaged in it, et cetera. So that's one piece. Another part is this piece about what I'm really on my part of my mission at this point is to find people like Susan who are next generation in these philanthropic families, but they're the people who have the social justice, racial justice commitment and drive, and to be able to support and encourage them, because this generational transfer of wealth is real. It's going to happen. It's in the process of happening. And so can we support people? And generally, younger people have a broader, more diverse life experiences, been exposed to more people, et cetera. And so that's another promising angle to this. And then third is the reality of this technological revolution. Yeah. Is that, and we saw this during the George Floyd period as well, is that with all of the it's just making a contribution is a click away, right? And so that you're able to move technologically large sums of money from large numbers of people with fairly low friction. And so what are we doing and what can we do to harness? It's actually one of the things I learned more about writing this book about the March of Dimes. And so FDR was trying to galvanize support for fight polio, and he encouraged people to send in a dime. And they had all these envelopes coming into the White House with a dime and $1 in here. And so it was one of these first small dollar fundraising efforts. And so that is much more possible technologically now, which also reduces the sway of the gatekeepers and the people who have traditionally held the resources. So I think all those three things together should be able to help us get some meaningful enough number of resources to advance the kinds of change we want to see.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I've been able to bear witness to a lot of the work that I think that you're doing and that your team is doing around trying to partner and encourage, especially young philanthropy, especially these young activists and younger leaders to sort of step up and take space, and hopefully moving the needle. And that brings me to kind of think about what your perspective is also on partnership. And, there's a lot of different ways in which we can partner in movement building, partner in grant making, partner in coalition building. And so, in your experience, what have been some of the more successful partnerships that you have been able to embark on, be it with government, be it with other funders, be it with other communities? Talk to me a little bit about partnership in pursuit of systems change.
Well, my first reaction was kind of well, there's this balance because the work needs to happen. The intensity, the inequality, the demands of the moment are very great. And so how much time and energy do you spend pursuing partnership and trying to get agreement and consensus and whatnot versus just kind of doing the work? And I will say that In many ways, those have been the most successful philanthropic partnerships. Have not been where it has formally been about a partnership, but it's been about where someone says, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And you let other people know. And then people are like, oh, well, that looks interesting. Let me come in and do that with you. And so in a lot of ways, like that is how Susan's parents were successful in terms of some of their philanthropic efforts. They created, ProPublica, Center for American Progress. I mentioned they were just kind of like, we're going to do this. And they brought it into being. People were like, oh, well, that looks interesting. I want to be part of it as well. And so doing the work, but letting people know you're doing it and inviting partnership, I have found actually to be more effective than spending a lot of time trying to formalize a coalition and agreement, et cetera, and whatnot. So, and then I think to the Stacey Abrams thing, right? So we're going to do it. We did it. Some people came in on it, and then it opened the door for her to become successful. So that a whole bunch of other folks actually came in and supported her.
Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I see that there's a rising appetite for not waiting until all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, especially with sort of the rising gen of like, something needs to be done.
Right.
Let's do it. And there's a informality around the conversations, like of, me calling you and being like, I'm doing this. This is why. If you want to come, we'd love to have you. No pressure. Right. I think that there's it allows kind of an urgency and a pace to snowball in that way. And I think, and you tell me if you've had this experience, but I've also found that is more beneficial to the grantee or to the entity, because I think when on the philanthropic side, sometimes when we all just sort of wait for each other, like somebody's got to be the first one.
Right.
And when we all kind of wait for each other and we're almost like playing this game of chicken around like, well, who's going to put their money in first to show me that it's okay? Like, what penguin are we going to push off the cliff first to make sure that they don't get eaten? And so that it stagnates the space, right? In a way. And it also inhibits access, I think, for other grantees, because if you don't have the relationship or the connection to have that first mover, then you're almost dead in the water as far as the work that you're trying to get done, because everybody's just waiting to for somebody else to be the risk taker.
Right.
So I don't know. Does that resonate?
Yeah. Well, what you had mentioned, Steve, about the informality and the connections and the relationships. Well, that's an important element, I think, of systems change that doesn't get enough attention to, is to have these relationships and to have the community, the connection, the trust that then can make things possible. And that's actually a lot of how the Obama Super PAC came together, is that we were in this national formal donor network, but it wasn't a project of that network. But because we were in it, we knew people and we had these relationships and people trusted us and we knew them, et cetera. So we created this ecosystem within which we could say, okay, we're doing this project, and we knew the people. So attending to relationship building, community building, trust building, I think is even more important than some of these formal things that actually get hammered out and whatnot. So
I wanted to ask you too, Steve, because I think that you play a really pivotal role in kind of what you spoke about before in paving a path and I think mentoring, especially next-gen philanthropists and next-gen activists. And what would your advice be to kind of this next gen, this rising gen who have a lot of hunger, who have a lot of appetite for making change, but maybe don't have a whole bunch of resources? They have some, but maybe not, like the levels to which that, we're talking about that exist today. But let's say that there's a group of next gen and they're all like, I've got $10,000 or $15,000. What advice do you have to them about, I think, feeling paralyzed, that maybe it feels like it's not enough money or it's not enough time or it's not enough energy or resources to actually make change? What advice do you have to that group that really does want to do something but doesn't quite feel that maybe they're big enough?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is where is one focusing? And so to understand the significance of state and local efforts. And so particularly state and local efforts in states going through demographic transformation, places like Georgia, places like Texas, Arizona, North Carolina are making an investment in the local area and local leaders there can be quite significant. And so that doesn't require as much money. So I think in terms of like that, level of focus. Another piece is this piece about backing leaders. And so I've been exploring, Susan was a social worker. And so that's when I began to learn that there's this whole pipeline of idealistic, energetic, talented people who can be supported with very little amount of money. And so social work students need to do these practicums where you work 3 days a week and full-time, and you get placed with community organizations and whatnot. In certainly several states, if not most of the country, a $5,000 practicum makes a big difference. And so then you have a person who's helping them become an activist. They'll become an activist hopefully the rest of their life with that $5,000 to $10,000 investment. So that's another piece. And then also I think I've been somewhat drawn to this, I've been kind of using this word of like mini, and not even mini is too big a word, but it's like weekend sabbaticals, right? And so for executive directors of organizations, these jobs are very stressful. Can you give somebody a 3-day weekend, rent them out at Airbnb so they can just get away and refresh and whatnot? And that doesn't cost a lot of money, but it helps to actually move things forward. And then the last thing is that there's this concept right around people who are in these different families around the multiple forms of assets that you have. And so access is a form of influence, reputation and relationships, name at different times. Like somebody from one of these families called me and says, I'm being asked to go on this board, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I was like, as smart as you are, they don't want you for your intelligence. They want you for your name, right? And so that's an asset. And then how do you utilize that? And so both in terms of validating the right people, the right organizations, the right strategies, but also putting pressure on those entities that have the big resources. And this is the other reality of being in this new technological age, is that you can put up a Google Doc that tracks what people are doing and what foundations are giving to, what corporations are doing, and that what were the commitments made around after George Floyd was killed, and where do those things stand? Just put it up into a public Google Doc, send it around on social media, and try to bring pressure to bear. So that's a leveraging effect to get people who have bigger resources to be more accountable. And there's this bridging role that I think people in these families can play in that regard.
I mean, I think that's super spot on. And also there's strength in numbers there, right? So it's like if 5 people are like, I've got time, I've got influence, and I've got a small amount of resources to give, that all of a sudden feels a lot bigger, right? So I think that's really spot on. And I hope that we're going to start seeing more of that and getting sort of that groundswell of interest and people just sort of saying, I'm going to do what I can do today.
Yeah.
And that actually goes a really long way. And well, Steve, I've sort of got 2 more closing questions for you. I think the first really is, what question or thought do you want to leave our listeners with today? What do you want them to be talking about after they listen to this episode?
Well, I think there is a piece around what can I do? And so I would encourage everybody to be looking at, and everybody can do something. And this is such a period of destruction that everything is needed. So I think encourage people to think about, and also in linked to that is, what are you passionate about? Because we need everything. They're destroying everything. And so we really have to rebuild this country. And so I did a call with somebody yesterday who's in the entertainment space, and they create like films and whatnot. Just trying to figure out how to utilize that talent and interest and passion for this moment. And so then I was talking to her about how back in the day, in the early 2000s, MoveOn.org used to do this partnership with this entity, Brave New Films, which had done these documentaries, Fox, they was talking about Fox News, et cetera. And they combined their efforts, and they had these house parties all over the country to see this documentary using MoveOn's infrastructure and then the content creation. But this person had this passion and this talent around film creation, trying to figure out how to put that to bear. So I think everybody should think about what is their talent and passion, and then start grappling with how can they make that, put that to the disposal of this moment and this movement to really rebuild this country.
That's great. Well, I think my last question then is understanding that and thinking about that. Everybody can do something. What gives you hope? What's giving you hope right now, Steve?
Well, frankly, it's the math of the matter, right? And so for all of this effort to the racial panic that informs the people in the White House who are trying to hold back the demographic revolution and to roll it back, it's inexorable and irreversible. And so the population is 41% people of color now. There are and have always been what I call a meaningful minority of progressive whites, roughly a third to 40%. That's the majority of people within this country, and it remains the majority of people within this country. For all of these attacks, and just why you will note that so much of these efforts, what people are doing, are trying to suppress democracy, stop people from voting, discount votes, make it more difficult, because they know that if everybody participates, that they're going to lose. And so I think what fundamentally gives me most hope and confidence is that the numbers remain on our side. And so we have to carry ourselves with that confidence.
Really well said. Really well said. I actually, that's such a potent and important reminder. I feel like the math of the matter that's actually just probably going to be the title of this episode, because I think that it's just like, it's really spot on. And I want to make sure that also we give a link to your podcast in the show notes here, because I really want all of our listeners to go and listen. And obviously the link to all of your amazing, amazing books. And just really appreciate you coming on, Steve, and having this conversation with me. I feel like we could go on for the next 2 hours. And so I hope to have you back, maybe to talk about your book when it comes out next year. But this has been really wonderful, and I've learned so much, as I always do in my conversations with you. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for what you do. I think you've always been very intentional and thoughtful around your position, your positioning. How can you utilize all of that to advance change? And so I think that's part of what our connection and bond has been. So I just want to say publicly how much I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Steve.